On this channel, we've covered some of the most harrowing tales from some of the most intimidating dive sites around the world. Now, some of you viewers may have wondered, which is the deadliest? Is there one diving location that's more dangerous, more terrifying, more unbelievable than all the rest? The answer is yes. There is one particular dive site with more fatalities to its name than any other. More astonishing than that, no one knows for sure exactly why. Over the years, this mysterious and lethal site has witnessed some very newsworthy accidents, including the deaths of famous divers. But while the international community may be familiar with some of these isolated, high-profile stories, the locals, especially the local rescue teams, are desperate to alert the public about the larger picture. This is the larger picture. This is the incredible history and enduring mystery of Egypt's Blue Hole. To visit the deadliest dive site in the world, you have to travel to a remote region of Egypt on the country's southeastern coast. Even today, there are still only a few major roads that will take you all the way out there, and only one small airport. Along the way, for hundreds of miles, you will see almost nothing but desert. In a country with more than 100 million people living in it, this entire 23,000 square mile region only has about 600,000 of them. If you choose to drive from Cairo, it'll take you about 6.5 hours, but if you do, eventually you'll reach the small coastal town of Dahab. Historically, the first people to arrive here were the Bedouins, Arabic-speaking nomadic people who have long lived in the deserts of the Middle East. With the dramatic Sinai Mountains perched behind them and the calm waters of the Red Sea at their feet, Dahab once served as an idyllic fishing village for generations of Bedouins. However, had these Bedouins been able to fly drones or board helicopters many generations ago, they would have almost immediately noticed something very unusual about their beloved fishing town. It has a hole in it. The jagged, rocky slopes of the Sinai Mountains descend partway below the surface of the Red Sea, but then jut back inward dramatically at one specific point in the coastline. It is at this particular point where, underneath the water, a massive depression sits in the flesh of the earth. Early Bedouins can certainly be forgiven for not knowing the full extent of what was hidden just beneath them. After all, the depression is an example of a strange geological phenomena that nobody fully recognized until at least the latter half of the 20th century. It is, in fact, a submarine sinkhole. It wasn't until recent decades that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration began working alongside recreational divers and fishermen who had been saying for years that they were finding huge underwater sinkholes in various parts of the world. Even today, the NOAA, or NOAA, is still unraveling the mystery of what the Blue Hole and other sinkholes like it actually are, or how they come to exist. Their current theory is that they are similar to sinkholes on land, but they're simply located underwater. The organization admits that much is still to be learned. It is still completely unknown how many of these submarine sinkholes exist, or where they may be located around the world. The full extent of the submarine sinkhole off the coast of Dahab wasn't widely known until the late 1960s. That's because, in June of 1967, war broke out between Israel and the Arab countries of Jordan, Syria, and Egypt. The war was remarkably short, known to historians today as the Six-Day War. But in that short time, Israel managed to capture a swath of territory, including the Sinai Peninsula, and also uncover what many today consider the most beautiful and enchanting dive site on Earth. The Israeli occupation of the Sinai Peninsula would last for another 15 years. In 1982, the Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty was officially implemented, and Egypt finally established diplomatic relations with Israel. During the 15-year military occupation, however, the submarine sinkhole off the coast of Dahab was explored by Israeli dive teams. Right away, for the first time, the world finally awakened to the extraordinary diving location that the Blue Hole of Dahab truly is. So what makes it so extraordinary? Well, for starters, unlike many dive sites, the Blue Hole is easily accessible right from the beach. You need only wade out a few meters into the water, and you're there, close enough to remain in earshot of the people still sunning on the shore. Knee-deep in calm water, take just one step forward, and it's a 400-plus foot drop. However, this is not the way divers actually do it. The proper way to enter is from the opposite side. The entrance to the Blue Hole is up the coastline, about 200 meters away. The next thing that makes the Blue Hole so unique is what you find once you enter. What looks initially like an unassuming drop-off into shallow water becomes, after just a few feet of swimming, an open void. It doesn't matter how clean or clear your diving goggles are, you cannot see the bottom. The beginning of the diving route takes you along what is best described as an underwater canyon. Huge rocky walls surround you on either side. Below, the walls descend deeper and deeper, eventually vanishing into the blue nothingness underneath. This wide avenue leads the way forward. The bottom remains so far below as to be completely out of sight the entire time. The height is actually so intense that it's common for divers to get vertigo. Floating in space, hundreds of feet above a perilous drop, the human body and mind have only one natural instinct in this situation. Yet, for those who can withstand the gut-wrenching environment, it can be the thrill of a lifetime. But the most astonishing part of this one-of-a-kind dive site is still to come. Eventually, as intrepid divers swim their way further and further, they see, growing in the distance, something that seems almost too mystical to be real. A bluish glow, as if there is a faint light source sitting at the bottom of the ocean. As you get closer, the bluish glow soon becomes undeniable. It grows larger and brighter until it dominates your field of vision. What this supernatural entity really turns out to be is a massive archway leading into the Blue Hole itself. From up at the surface, almost like the pupil of some massive eye looking out towards the sun, daylight pours down through the thin layer of seawater and floods down through the chasm of the Blue Hole. Recreational divers who have swum this far have already been flirting with the limit of what is considered a safe depth. Now, perhaps more than 100 feet below the surface, they must contend with the fact that this glowing archway is still way, way below them. Those who have seen the archway in person all share the belief that there is something almost magically alluring about it. Upon his visit to the site, the excellent diver and TV presenter Monty Halls noted that when you first come upon it, the archway looks easy to pass through, as if the open chamber of the Blue Hole is inches away on the other side. In reality, the archway is nearly 100 feet across. The blue light is so intense that it shines out across even that long distance, creating the illusion that it is much shorter than it really is. After descending to a depth of over 400 feet and passing through this incredible archway, divers rise through the glowing vertical tunnel and emerge back into daylight at the main opening of the Blue Hole. The entire dive, from start to finish, carries you a mere 250 meters along the shoreline. And while undeniably one of the most uniquely beautiful sights in the world, it is also unusually simple and straightforward. In fact, some in the technical diving community have made the claim that the Blue Hole should be one of the safest dive sites in the world. But it isn't. The rocky outcroppings near the entrance are littered with signs. Little makeshift tombstones with name after name after name after name. In fact, the total death count is unconfirmed, but ask a local Bedouin diver named Tariq Omar, who has been conducting body recoveries at the Blue Hole for decades, and he'll tell you that well over 100 people have died in the Blue Hole. Some divers familiar with the area even estimate as many as 200. This means the Blue Hole is by far the most lethal diving site on Earth. No cursed Mexican cenote nor dizzying Florida sinkhole even comes close to the rate of death that this wide, straight 250-meter stretch of Egyptian coastline somehow has. In fact, based on records kept by the International Underwater Cave Rescue and Recovery, the entire state of Florida, arguably the mecca of extreme underwater diving sites, has roughly the same yearly death toll as the Blue Hole on its own. Imagine one small stretch of highway out in the middle of nowhere causing as many accidents as every Formula One racetrack combined. Or imagine one small-town restaurant where more people get sick than every restaurant in a nearby city combined. Clearly, something out of the ordinary has to be going on. There is something freakish beneath the surface of the Blue Hole of Denab, and it's killing divers of all skill levels at a rate that is beyond abnormal. So, what is it? The people of Dahab have a local legend to explain the sensational killing capacity of the site. The legend states that long ago, there was a young woman who lived on the coast of Dahab named Shaheen. Shaheen had fallen in love with a local boy, but their love was forbidden by their parents. Against her will, Shaheen was engaged to be married to another man, a man who she didn't love. Way back then, the opening to the Blue Hole was not yet submerged by the sea. In despair, the young Shaheen threw herself over the edge, falling to her death. According to local legend, the Blue Hole is now haunted by Shaheen's restless spirit. With the enticing glow of the archway hundreds of feet below, the broken-hearted Shaheen lures young men to her, hypnotizing them before taking their souls into the next world. It's a stirring fable, and perhaps one that has more than a hint of truth behind it. But surely there has to be more to it than that. Well, as we're about to see, the history of deaths at this site is nothing short of unbelievable. So, without further ado, let's take a closer look at some of the people who have met their doom in the Blue Hole. Perhaps their stories can help shed some light on the true nature of this mind-bending phenomena. In November of 1997, two experienced divers from Ireland were in Dahab diving with the Paddy Diving School. They were 22-year-old Martin Guerra and 23-year-old Conor O'Regan. According to a report by the Irish Times, O'Regan had previous experience not only diving, but specifically with diving in the Red Sea. His fellow diver Guerra was a diving instructor who had been living in Egypt for the past year. On Wednesday, November 19, 1997, local diver Tarek Omar got the call he had been fearing he would get ever since he started working as an instructor in the area 2 years prior. Martin Guerra and Conor O'Regan had entered the Blue Hole together and had failed to resurface. Steeling his resolve, Omar dove into the Blue Hole to look for the missing pair. What he ended up finding would leave a permanent mark on his memory. The two Irishmen were resting in a ditch about 335 feet below the surface. Both had drowned, and yet their bodies remained locked in a haunting embrace, almost two corpses dancing. Omar later speculated that one had been sinking and the other had been trying to pull them back up when the pair both eventually drowned. But which of the pair had first begun sinking, and why? Their names are among the many that line the rock wall near the entrance, ensuring that even today, their tragic deaths will at the very least be remembered. But understood or explained? Not so much. Nearly a decade earlier, before Tarek Omar had moved to Dahab and earned himself the nickname Bone Collector, another pair of divers had met a similar fate. Daniel Malak and Tarek El-Khadi both drowned in the Blue Hole on the same day in 1988. Tarek Omar had very little time to dwell on the past, however. Within a couple of years of his first grisly recovery mission, he found himself at the forefront of what would become the Blue Hole's most famous death. In April of the year 2000, 22-year-old Russian-Israeli diving instructor Yuri Lipsky had been itching to dive the Blue Hole for at least a year prior. On that fateful day, witnesses say they saw Lipsky entering the water off the coast of Dahab with two very important things missing: a diving buddy and an extra oxygen tank. Lipsky's motivations for diving alone and with only one oxygen tank remain controversial to this day. But amazingly, one thing we do know he had with him that day was a video camera. The last anybody saw him alive, Lipsky was walking up the coast in his diving gear. When he failed to resurface, word spread quickly. Within a day, Lipsky's father had traveled from Russia to Dahab to look for his son. The man was reportedly all but ready to dive into the hole himself and had to be talked out of it by locals. Once again, the task of searching the Blue Hole fell to Tarek Omar. The search for Yuri Lipsky was unusual, in that Lipsky had been diving alone, and no one knew how far into the hole he had actually made it. The only way to find out was to conduct a thorough search. Lipsky's body was eventually found at 115 meters below the surface, nearly 3 times the depth considered safe for recreational divers. But Lipsky was no amateur. The 22-year-old was in fact a diving instructor. So why, millions soon wondered, did the video captured by his camera show him descending at a rapid rate towards his own demise? The roughly 7-minute video went on to make Lipsky's death one of the most famous in diving history. It was as disturbing as it was mysterious. Tarek Omar would later offer the theory that Lipsky was weighed down and that his camera may have tipped the scales. However, this explanation alone hasn't been enough to stop the internet from proliferating various theories about the nature of this strange and horrifying accident. Overlooked amid much of the hysteria is the fact that Lipsky's death is part of a larger phenomena, and the phenomena did not stop with Lipsky. A few years after Yuri Lipsky's death received international attention, a 24-year-old diver from England named James Smith went missing at the Blue Hole. The story initially followed what seemed to be emerging as a pattern. He entered the water, and somewhere between there and the opening 250 meters away, he simply vanished. However, one thing that makes Smith's death particularly haunting is that despite the fact he was known to die in a very specific location, namely the Blue Hole, his body has never been found. The rest of us can only assume he's still buried somewhere deep beneath the surface of the Red Sea, swallowed forever by the alluring spirit of Shaheen. Visitors to the Blue Hole today will see James Smith's name alongside many others. But there's another name that might make you do a double take. Karl Marx. It's not the author of the Communist Manifesto. It is, in fact, a 45-year-old German diver who had a fatal accident on January 10, 2007 at the Blue Hole of Dahab. A year after Marx, Swiss diver Stefan Felder suffered a similar fate, descending confidently and peacefully into the calm coastal waters of the Red Sea. Then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, he was nowhere to be found. In recent years, the deaths have not shown any signs of stopping either. In fact, in 2017, international interest was reignited in the remote diving site after a dramatic incident involving multiple pro divers. World record-setting freediver Alicia Zecchini traveled to the Blue Hole in July of 2017. Not only was Zecchini planning to dive at the deadly site, but she would in fact be attempting something that perhaps no person had ever attempted before. She would be trying to cross the Blue Hole's famous archway with just a single breath. Accompanying Zecchini was Irish safety diver Stephen Keenan. Keenan was described by Outsider magazine as, quote, "freediving's most accomplished and beloved safety diver." Surely, if anyone could pass through the deadly Blue Hole and live to tell the tale, it would be the sport's most accomplished and beloved safety diver, right? At about 160 feet below the surface, Alicia Zecchini became disoriented. Automatically, Keenan dove down to meet her. As he swam towards the surface carrying Zecchini, Zecchini was eventually able to regain her bearings and swim to safety. But when she got there, Keenan was nowhere to be found. It was later determined that Keenan had blacked out. It is unknown to this day the depth at which Keenan lost consciousness. He was found floating on the surface nearby, face down, motionless. Keenan's death sent shockwaves through the international diving community, providing even more evidence that the forces at work in Dahab were truly something above and beyond the ordinary in an already extraordinary sport. Alright, we've now looked at just 9 of the potentially 200 plus fatal accidents that have occurred at the Blue Hole. Frankly, most of what we learn from these stories is that whatever forces are at work, they're swift and they're powerful. Divers seem to just disappear in the blink of an eye. Seasoned professionals seem to suddenly lose their grasp of the situation, descending inexplicably, almost as if they're doing it on purpose. As bizarre as the whole thing is, thanks to an international community of diving experts and a growing interest in the site over previous decades, some plausible explanations do exist. We'll go through these one by one, starting with the phenomena known as narcosis. In underwater diving, one of the most important factors for divers to always consider is the inherent risk of breathing out of a gas tank at extreme depth. According to the NIH, quote, "certain gases at high pressure cause an anesthetic effect that alters a diver's consciousness." This strange condition has also been nicknamed the raptures of the deep. It has even been called the martini effect for the drunken state it seems to put unsuspecting divers in. The mechanics of it are still not completely understood by science, but in short, certain gases with higher lipophilicity cause mental impairment as underwater depth increases. These effects can be felt starting at depths below around 30 feet, and they're usually mild. But once you start descending to extreme depths of several hundred feet or more, the symptoms are downright shocking. Divers breathing at a depth of below 300 feet can experience powerful hallucinations. They can also lose their sense of both time and direction while experiencing dramatic changes in mood, including becoming manic or euphoric. In extreme cases, narcosis itself can even kill you. Divers in the Blue Hole are potentially encountering depths of 400 feet below the surface, meaning they are way beyond even the far threshold for severe narcosis. The connection here between the science and the mythology is hard to ignore. Upon reaching the glowing blue archway, divers may suddenly be overcome by an eerie change in both body and mind. This change is, by all accounts, something like being really drunk, really confused, and suddenly enthusiastic and impulsive. Could this be the sinister lore of the ancient spirit of Shaheen? As chilling as it is to consider, it is quite possible that many of the divers who met their demise here met it by the propulsion of their own flippers. Just ask Sylvie Martin. An experienced diver in her own right, Martin was diving the Blue Hole when, according to her own first-hand account, she began feeling off. At about 200 feet below the surface, she actually began intentionally deflating her buoyancy regulator. Her dive buddy had to swim down, grab her, and pull her up toward the surface before she suddenly came to her senses again. If narcosis can induce borderline suicidal behavior in experienced divers, what can it do to inexperienced divers? The simple reality of the blue hole is that it is really, really deep. Much deeper than many diving enthusiasts will ever go in their lifetime. Depth does incredibly dangerous things to your mind. But that's not all that depth does. Another deadly obstacle imposed by the blue hole's extreme depth is the sheer challenge of breathing itself. Not only do you run the risk of crazy hallucinations and deranged behavior thanks to narcosis, but you also run the risk of simply running out of air. The reason for this is simple, but easy to overlook or underestimate. The further you descend underwater, and the more water pressure increases, the more oxygen you need. This need increases at an alarmingly fast rate. Atmospheric pressure doubles every 10 meters. So, roughly speaking, every 10 meters you descend, your body requires double the amount of oxygen. When you are hundreds of feet below the surface, the amount of air you need to breathe is many, many times more than what you would normally need on land. Bringing enough air to make it all the way through the depths of the blue hole is a genuine logistical challenge. Even if you bring all the necessary equipment with you, which will surely include several tanks with different gas mixes which you can easily cycle through, you can't hang out down there for long. On the other hand, if you don't bring enough air in the first place, you're obviously in big trouble from the moment you start the dive. To be so catastrophically underprepared would seem like a rookie mistake. But there is ample reason to think that even experienced divers can seriously miscalculate at this particular site. For example, Yuri Lipsky, a diving instructor, reportedly entered the blue hole with only one tank strapped to his back. Even those who are familiar with the fact you need more oxygen for lower depths can still underestimate just how much they need for depths as extreme as this. So in short, we can add unexpectedly running out of air to the list of possible explanations, in addition to losing your mental faculties due to narcosis. But there's still more going on here. It's hard enough already to navigate an underwater dive site with a narcosis-drunken brain and no air in your lungs. But try doing it while also being so deep underwater that you can't even figure out which direction is the surface and which direction is the bottom of the ocean. Now, this sounds almost impossible because it's so far removed from our intuitions about the physical world, but in such a foreign, extreme environment, basic senses we normally rely on start to break down. According to the National Ocean Service, it is rare that sunlight ever reaches further than 200 meters below the surface of the ocean. Divers in the blue hole are potentially swimming well over halfway toward the point where their surroundings would become as black as empty outer space, where photosynthesis is impossible, and where, soon enough, David Attenborough would start pointing out shrimp that glow in the dark and fish with light bulbs dangling in front of their faces. Divers in the blue hole never quite reach this point of total blackness, but keep in mind, they are also wearing masks and heavy diving equipment, and they are swimming through dramatic underwater landscapes that block out what little light there is even further. The ominously intriguing blue glow of the archway is made so in large part by the fact that it dominates the spectrum of visible light at that depth. Now, divers will inevitably carry flashlights, but while these are lifesavers when it comes to one's immediate surroundings, they don't provide much help when it comes to the larger picture. Floating through deep, open waters with little to no ability to see the surface means you might decide it's time to bail, and yet realize with shock that you don't know which way to go. This, too, might explain why so many divers who enter the blue hole fail to resurface. There is one last factor worth considering when it comes to the blue hole, or rather, the Red Sea in general. The Red Sea is a unique body of water for two reasons. One, It is home to an unusually vast array of marine life, both fish and plant, many of which can only be found there and nowhere else. And 2, it is largely unexplored. Couple this with the fact that many of the Blue Hole's victims, including even some of the ones we looked at today, have never been found, and it does paint an interesting picture. Of course, let's be clear, this is highly speculative, but it does seem possible, given the amount of unique marine life and how little we still know about what lies beneath the Red Sea, that chance encounters with hostile organisms could perhaps explain some of these disappearances too. After all, where else are unsuspecting divers plunging freely into extreme depths of this particular body of water on a regular basis? The Red Sea has plenty of other popular diving sites, but none so extreme, so deep, so full of shadows. There is something distinctly human about underwater diving. It represents one of our most innate traits in its purest form, the primal impulse to venture into the unknown. It is hard to imagine a world more alien than the world awaiting those who swim the Blue Hole of Dahab, and yet it sits freely accessible just meters away from the bars and beach towels that line the South Egyptian shore. But this alien world also inflicts strange, rapid infirmities upon our land-dwelling human bodies. It sucks the air from our lungs, even when we thought we brought enough air with us. It confounds our special awareness, temporarily erasing physical realities as fundamental as the sky above and the ground below. Perhaps most frightening of all, it corrupts our minds, making us think and do things that only moments ago we would have never imagined. Contrary to what many might believe, however, safely diving the Blue Hole of Dahab is, in fact, possible. Highly experienced, technically proficient divers can and do take all the necessary precautions and swim through this marvelous natural wonder on a regular basis. But sadly, even to this day, they constitute a mere percentage of the total number of divers who make the voyage out to this mystical and remote site. Until the international diving community wakes up to the truly incredible risks associated with the Blue Hole and begins heeding the warnings and advice of local experts like Tarek Omar, the Blue Hole of Dahab will continue to cast its alluring spell over unsuspecting divers, reeling them in with its magical glow, then snatching them out of existence before anyone has time to save them. We hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. Tell us, what do you think is the most likely explanation for the huge amounts of deaths at the Blue Hole of Dahab? Would you ever consider visiting the site yourself? Please share your thoughts with us in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and please be sure to like the video and subscribe for more content like this in the near future. That's all for now. We'll see you next time.